Imagine a room. It's dimly lit, heavy with tension. In the center stands a figure, perhaps the very personification of power, gripping the reins of authority. But as the camera zooms in, something feels off. This individual doesn't radiate wisdom or integrity. In fact, they seem anything but deserving of such influence. The question lingers in the air. Why is it that the most foolish, morally bankrupt, or incompetent people so often find themselves at the helm of power? Power is supposed to be a reflection of capability, intelligence, and competence, isn't it? In theory, the most capable should lead, the most morally grounded, the most adept. But in reality, the opposite often holds true. We've seen it in history, in politics, in our everyday lives. The most foolish often rise to the top, the most ruthless, the most self-serving. How can this be? How can those least suited to power, those who lack wisdom, empathy, or the qualities we think leaders should have, end up controlling the levers of influence? There's an unsettling truth to this paradox. The very traits we associate with foolishness, self-centered ambition, opportunism, manipulation, are often the precise qualities that propel people to positions of power. This phenomenon is not new. It was laid bare by one of the most profound political thinkers in history, Niccolò Machiavelli. In his seminal work, The Prince, Machiavelli observed that power is not granted based on virtue or intellect. No, it's about pragmatism. It's about understanding the mechanics of human nature and exploiting them. But why, you might ask, would someone like Machiavelli, often seen as the patron saint of political cynicism, be so obsessed with this foolishness? He understood that the game of power is not for the idealists, the soft-hearted, or the morally perfect. Instead, it rewards those who know how to manipulate perception, those who understand how fear and desire can shape the masses. True power, he argued, comes from understanding how to wield these emotions, and those who understand this dynamic, more than any inherent wisdom, often end up on top. What we face, then, is a paradox of its own. The more competent someone is, the less likely they are to succeed in the quest for power, at least in the traditional sense of power. The more good a person is, the more naive they are to the undercurrents that truly shape the world of politics and influence. In fact, the more virtuous you are, the more vulnerable you become. Those who rise to power often do so not by virtue of their ability, but by manipulating the very systems that reward superficial charm and ruthless strategy. Why is that? It's because the masses, driven by emotions, fears, and desires, rarely care about competence. They are drawn to the image of strength, the illusion of control, and the promise of certainty. And those who can present themselves as the answer to their uncertainties, whether through charisma or sheer force, often rise to power. The public wants to be led. They don't necessarily want to be guided. But here's the million-dollar question. Why do we keep falling for it? Why do we continue to elect or even elevate those who are most visibly foolish or self-serving? As we turn to the historical context that gave birth to these ideas, the reality begins to sink in. This isn't just some intellectual exercise. This paradox of power has shaped civilizations, destroyed empires, and manipulated the course of history. The question then is not whether we're seeing this happen today. It's how and why it continues to play out in ways that seem eerily predictable. In the early 16th century, Italy was a fractured collection of city-states, embroiled in constant warfare and political turmoil. It was a world where the strongest prevailed and where alliances shifted like sand. The Pope, the King, the merchant, each wielded influence, but none seemed to hold it securely. Amidst this chaos rose a man who would forever change our understanding of power: Niccolò Machiavelli. Born in 1469, Machiavelli lived through the tumult of Renaissance Italy. The Medici family, the dominant power in Florence, were just one example of the merciless nature of the political world of that time. Betrayals, shifting allegiances, and the ever-present threat of war were the daily realities for those in power. Machiavelli, a diplomat and military officer in Florence, witnessed firsthand the complexities of political maneuvering, the collapse of alliances, and the rise of figures who embodied ruthless pragmatism over traditional virtue. His experiences in the turbulent world of Renaissance Italy were formative. At a time when political theory was still largely shaped by ideals of virtue and morality, Machiavelli's observations stood in stark contrast. He did not write about ideal governments or how rulers should act based on some moral compass. No, Machiavelli was deeply pragmatic. He saw the world as it was, not as it should be. In 1513, Machiavelli wrote *The Prince*, a treatise on political power that would go on to shape political thought for centuries. It's in this book that he introduced some of his most famous and often controversial ideas. One of the central tenets of Machiavelli's philosophy was that rulers should not be constrained by traditional morality. While other philosophers and statesmen preached ideals of virtue, justice, and the common good, Machiavelli argued that a ruler's primary goal should be to maintain power by any means necessary. In his view, the world was not a place where leaders succeeded by virtue alone. A leader who relied solely on moral principles was destined for failure. Machiavelli famously argued that the ends justify the means, a concept that would haunt political discourse for centuries. If a ruler needed to deceive, manipulate, or even commit violence to secure their rule, so be it. In Machiavelli's world, appearances mattered more than reality, and strength, rather than wisdom, was the key to maintaining control. Machiavelli's pragmatism was both revolutionary and disturbing. While others debated the best forms of government, idealistic republics or enlightened monarchies, Machiavelli focused on the realities of power. How could a ruler navigate a world full of treachery, betrayal, and violence? How could they rise to power, and more importantly, how could they stay there? A central theme in Machiavelli's work is his stark view of human nature. He argued that people are inherently selfish, driven more by fear, desire, and self-interest than by any higher moral code. This brutal honesty about human nature is what makes Machiavelli's ideas so strikingly modern. He rejected the notion that people would naturally follow a virtuous or wise leader. In fact, he believed that people would often betray or act against their best interests if they saw an opportunity for personal gain. Thus, Machiavelli's rulers had to be prepared for this. They had to understand that the people, and even their closest allies, were unreliable. A ruler could not afford to rely on good intentions alone. They had to manipulate and control their subjects, weaving a web of alliances, offering rewards and instilling fear to maintain their grip on power. Machiavelli's ideas were revolutionary because they acknowledged the messiness of politics. Where others saw a virtuous ruler as an ideal, Machiavelli saw it as a fantasy. His political realism stripped away the illusion of moral purity in leadership and instead focused on how power truly functioned. He was not a cynic for the sake of cynicism. He was a realist, forced to confront the harsh truths of human behavior and political survival. The real genius of Machiavelli was not in his promotion of cruelty or ruthlessness, but in his recognition that power is often not in the hands of the virtuous, but those who understand the psychology of fear, manipulation, and self-interest. To succeed, a ruler had to become a master of these dark arts, using them when necessary to ensure their rule. In essence, the prince was not a guide to how to be a good ruler, but how to maintain power, no matter the cost. This brings us back to the paradox we explored at the beginning. Why do the most foolish or immoral often end up in power? It's because, as Machiavelli knew all too well, the game of power isn't about wisdom or virtue. It's about perception, manipulation, and ruthlessness. Those who understand this dynamic can use it to their advantage, no matter how lacking they may be in actual competence or integrity. You may have wondered, why do the most foolish individuals often rise to the top, even when their competence is questionable? The answer lies in the psychological mechanisms that govern human behavior and decision-making, particularly in relation to power. These mechanisms are not only complex, they are often deeply unconscious, shaping our choices and allegiances in ways that we don't fully understand. And at the heart of this is a concept known as the dark triad: 3 personality traits that have been shown to predict success in power struggles. These are Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. And what's chilling is that these traits, often associated with moral corruption and manipulation, are precisely the ones that often propel individuals to positions of power. Let's break this down. The first trait in the dark triad is named after none other than Niccolò Machiavelli. People high in Machiavellian traits are strategic, opportunistic, and willing to manipulate others to achieve their goals. They see relationships as tools to be used rather than genuine connections, and they are highly skilled at influencing others. The second trait is characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance and a need for admiration. Narcissists are often charming and charismatic, which makes them irresistible to followers. Their self-confidence and boldness give them the aura of a leader, even when their actual abilities may be lacking. In fact, narcissism often enables individuals to navigate complex social environments with ease, securing the loyalty of those around them through sheer force of personality. Finally, it is marked by a lack of empathy and remorse. Psychopaths are skilled at taking risks, manipulating others without feeling guilty, and prioritizing their own success over the well-being of others. In the realm of power, psychopathy can be a highly useful trait. People high in psychopathy tend to be ruthless in their pursuit of goals, and they often succeed because they are not hindered by moral considerations that would otherwise constrain others. But these dark traits are not just about cold, calculating strategy. They also involve emotional manipulation. Power, after all, is not just about what you know. It's about how you make people feel. Those who understand human emotions, who can exploit fear, admiration, or desire, are able to exert influence in ways that others cannot. Take, for example, the role of charismatic. Charismatic individuals draw people in with their presence, their vision, and their promises. Their ability to make others feel as though they are part of something greater than themselves is intoxicating. This emotional connection is often mistaken for true leadership ability, when in reality, it's merely a calculated performance designed to win people over. This is a key element in Machiavelli's framework. Leaders who understand the power of perception, how they are viewed by their subjects, can effectively control the narrative around them. They can create an image of strength, competence, or wisdom, regardless of their actual abilities. This is why foolish individuals can rise to power, because they know how to make others believe in them, even when there is little substance to back it up. But it's not just charisma and manipulation that make fools rise. Fear, too, plays a crucial role. Humans, as Machiavelli noted, are governed by fear far more than by love or loyalty. A leader who can create or exploit fear, whether it's fear of the other, fear of chaos, or fear of the unknown, can manipulate entire populations into submission. Fear makes people crave certainty, and in that craving they often hand over their trust to the first figure who offers it. The psychology behind this is straightforward. In times of uncertainty or crisis, people become desperate for stability. A leader who can promise that stability, even if that promise is empty, can gain immense power. This is why so many of the most foolish or ruthless leaders are able to capitalize on fear. Fear of change, fear of instability, fear of losing control. The masses, in their desire for security, often latch onto the very individuals who will exploit that fear for personal gain. Another psychological mechanism at play is the herd mentality. Humans are social creatures, and in times of stress or uncertainty, they are more likely to follow the crowd. Leaders who understand how to tap into group dynamics can manipulate collective emotions and behaviors. It's easier to convince a group to follow a certain course of action if they see others doing the same, creating a sense of validation and security. This is how power is often consolidated, not through the merit of an individual, but through the manipulation of group psychology. Once a leader gains a following, their influence can snowball. The larger the group that supports them, the harder it becomes for dissenting voices to be heard, and before long, a foolish leader is at the helm, not because they deserve it, but because they've expertly leveraged the mechanisms of influence and control. The psychological mechanisms that allow foolish people to rise to power are deeply embedded in the fabric of human nature. The dark triad traits, emotional manipulation, the exploitation of fear, and the herd mentality all contribute to the unsettling reality that those most suited to lead, those who are competent, wise, and moral, are often overshadowed by those who understand how to manipulate human psychology. Machiavelli understood this more than anyone. In his world, power wasn't about virtue. It was about knowing how to bend the masses to your will, even if you were a fool at the core. Fear and opportunism are two deeply interwoven forces that shape political behavior and power dynamics. These forces are often at the heart of how individuals, groups, and even entire nations navigate the treacherous waters of politics. At their core, both fear and opportunism exploit the vulnerabilities within human nature, guiding actions and decisions that often prioritize survival and personal gain over higher ideals or collective well-being. Fear has long been a powerful tool in the arsenal of political leaders. It can be harnessed to manipulate, control, and rally people to a cause. This isn't just about fear of external threats, but also fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of losing power, or fear of being rendered irrelevant. Machiavelli, for instance, argues that fear is a much more reliable motivator than love. In The Prince, he contends that a ruler who is loved might be betrayed or undermined, as love is fickle and subject to the whims of the people. However, fear, when carefully managed, ensures compliance. Leaders throughout history have understood this dynamic, whether they are employing fear of war, of economic collapse, or even of internal subversion. For example, totalitarian regimes often build their power by cultivating a climate of fear. They focus on creating a sense of constant threat, whether real or fabricated, so that the public remains dependent on the state for protection. Fear keeps the masses in line, as people become more focused on their immediate survival than on their broader freedoms or rights. This fear, once ingrained, can justify extreme measures like surveillance, censorship, and violence. Opportunism is another key driver of political behavior. While fear is often about controlling or responding to external pressures, opportunism is more about taking advantage of situations for personal gain. Opportunistic individuals are skilled at navigating political landscapes by capitalizing on shifting circumstances, seizing moments of vulnerability, and aligning themselves with those in power to advance their own agendas. The political opportunist understands that timing is everything. Whether it's a changing public sentiment, an economic downturn, or a power vacuum, the opportunist knows how to position themselves to benefit from these shifts. It's about knowing where to be and when to act, often at the expense of principles or ideology. An excellent example of political opportunism is the rise of political figures in times of crisis. In moments of chaos, when the usual order is disrupted, opportunists often rise to the forefront. They may present themselves as saviors, offering quick solutions to complex problems, even if their solutions are short-sighted or self-serving. Think of political figures who gained power during periods of war, economic collapse, or social unrest. Their ascent was often not because of their ideology, but because they were able to identify and exploit the moment. Fear and opportunism are rarely independent of each other. Opportunistic political figures often thrive in environments where fear is widespread, as fear opens the door for their agendas to take root. When people are fearful, they are more likely to support leaders who promise stability and security, even if those promises come at a significant cost to personal freedoms or democratic values. Conversely, fear can also be a consequence of opportunism. Political opportunists can stoke fear to further their own aims. By exaggerating external threats or internal crises, they can manipulate public sentiment and create a sense of urgency. This, in turn, justifies extreme actions, consolidates power, and allows for the erosion of opposition. History is full of leaders who have used fear to justify the expansion of their own authority. A classic example of this dynamic is the way in which authoritarian leaders have used the state of emergency to justify expanded powers. By playing on the public's fears, whether it's of terrorism, crime, or civil unrest, These leaders position themselves as necessary protectors of the state, while simultaneously using the opportunity to curtail rights and freedoms. The political climate in Germany after World War I was one of economic despair, political instability, and a loss of national pride. Hitler's ability to tap into the fear of communism, economic collapse, and the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles allowed him to exploit national sentiment and rise to power. His regime, based on fear of the other Jews, communists, and other minorities, is a textbook example of how fear can be used to create a strongman figure who promises to restore national pride and security. In this case, opportunism combined with fear to bring about one of the darkest chapters in modern history. In the 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy capitalized on the fear of communism that gripped the United States during the Cold War. Through opportunistic tactics, McCarthy accused countless individuals of being communists or communist sympathizers, often without any solid evidence. His ability to manipulate the public's fear of Soviet infiltration for his own political gain led to widespread paranoia and the erosion of civil liberties, as people were forced to comply with his demands or risk losing their jobs and reputations. After the September 11 attacks, the United States experienced a profound shift in political discourse. Fear of terrorism, fueled by a series of attacks and threats, led to the erosion of civil liberties, most notably through the passing of the Patriot Act. Political leaders, recognizing the public's fear, acted opportunistically to push forward agendas that would otherwise have been politically untenable. In this case, fear justified the expansion of surveillance and military interventions around the world, even as it diminished privacy and individual freedoms. While fear and opportunism can lead to the consolidation of power, they often come at a significant cost. Fear can lead to the erosion of democratic norms, the suppression of dissent, and the rise of authoritarianism. Opportunism, on the other hand, can result in leaders who are more focused on their own political survival than on the needs of their people. The combination of both can create a dangerous cycle. Leaders use fear to consolidate power, while opportunists exploit this fear for personal gain, creating a volatile and unstable political environment. In the end, it's important to remember that fear and opportunism are not only the tools of tyrants, but are also deeply embedded in the structures of democratic politics. Both forces play a role in shaping the political landscape, influencing how power is gained, maintained, and ultimately lost. The role of fear and opportunism in politics cannot be overstated. Together, they create a potent cocktail that influences everything from election outcomes to international relations. While they can be used to stabilize power, they also have the potential to destroy it, especially when they become the primary motivators behind political action. Understanding the dynamics of fear and opportunism allows us to better navigate the complex world of politics, helping to safeguard against their worst excesses and ensuring that leaders remain accountable to the people they serve. In the intricate dance of politics, one of the most compelling phenomena is the illusion of competence. It's a concept deeply embedded in how power is perceived, maintained, and manipulated. This illusion exists when individuals or groups in positions of power are believed to be more capable, knowledgeable, or skilled than they actually are. In politics, this illusion becomes an essential tool for those who seek power, as well as a barrier to the recognition of true ability and merit. At its core, the illusion of competence is the belief that someone is better suited for leadership because of their ability to project confidence, command authority, or craft a compelling narrative, regardless of whether they possess the actual skills, knowledge, or integrity needed to lead effectively. It is a dangerous dynamic that obscures true competence and can have devastating consequences for governance, society, and democracy itself. Power and true ability are two distinct forces, and often they are at odds. Power, especially in politics, is more about perception, manipulation, and control than it is about substance or effectiveness. True ability, on the other hand, is rooted in knowledge, skill, and the capacity to make informed, ethical decisions. Perception is one of the most influential factors in the creation of the illusion of competence. People in power often focus more on how they are perceived than on how effectively they actually perform their duties. This is because perception, especially when it is amplified by media, social dynamics, and propaganda, can often override reality. When a politician is skilled at crafting a narrative of competence, even if it is detached from their actual abilities, they can effectively maintain power. Consider the example of a charismatic leader who makes bold speeches and presents themselves as a decisive figure. These public appearances can give the impression of competence, especially if they are delivered with conviction. But beneath the surface, if these leaders lack the requisite knowledge or skills, their competence becomes little more than an illusion. Their policies may be poorly designed or ineffectively implemented, but their ability to maintain the appearance of competence allows them to continue leading. Confidence is another pillar upon which the illusion of competence rests. People naturally gravitate toward leaders who appear sure of themselves, even if that confidence is unwarranted. In politics, confidence is often mistaken for competence. Leaders who project certainty, even when lacking understanding, can persuade the public that they have the answers to complex problems. Their confidence can blind the electorate to their actual lack of qualifications or expertise. In contrast, a genuinely competent leader may not always come across as confident, especially if they are deeply analytical or cautious in their approach. True competence requires humility, a willingness to acknowledge uncertainty, and an openness to criticism, traits that can be misinterpreted as weakness in a political environment that values confidence above all. The illusion of competence is dangerous because it allows individuals to rise to power based on superficial qualities rather than actual merit. When leaders or politicians are able to convince the public that they are competent, they are often given leeway to make decisions, enact policies, or control institutions without scrutiny. This can lead to several negative consequences. When those in power are not actually competent, the systems they manage or the policies they implement may fail. The consequences of this failure are often masked by their ability to maintain the illusion of control. Over time, the inability to make competent decisions can erode the social, political, and economic stability of a nation. Leaders who project competence are often seen as infallible or beyond reproach. This creates an environment in which accountability is stifled. In a democratic system, this undermines the checks and balances that are supposed to keep leaders in check. The illusion of competence allows leaders to act without fear of consequences, often leading to corruption, authoritarianism, or policies that harm the public. The illusion of competence often contributes to the rise of the cult of personality, where a leader is praised and followed not for their actual accomplishments, but for their ability to project an image of strength and capability. This makes it difficult for the public to differentiate between genuine competence and the appearance of competence. In extreme cases, this can result in blind loyalty to a leader or party, even when their actions or decisions are detrimental to the nation. Perhaps the most insidious consequence of the illusion of competence is that it diverts attention from truly competent individuals. When those who are truly skilled, knowledgeable, and experienced are overshadowed by those who project a false image of competence, the system loses out on effective leadership. The people who could actually solve problems or guide the nation are often sidelined in favor of those who can play the political game more effectively. Media plays a pivotal role in both creating and perpetuating the illusion of competence. Through selective coverage, framing, and repetition, media outlets can elevate certain individuals as leaders, promoting their image and crafting narratives of competence that may not be based on reality. Public perception is often swayed by these media portrayals, making it difficult to distinguish between true ability and superficial confidence. The public, meanwhile, has a tendency to place trust in appearances. The complexity of modern politics often overwhelms voters, making it difficult to evaluate the true competence of a leader. As a result, they may rely more on the leader's public image or personality traits than on their actual track record. This makes it easier for politicians to maintain power, even if they lack the ability to govern effectively. Ronald Reagan, before his presidency, was an actor with no substantial experience in public policy. However, his charm, ability to communicate, and the perception that he was a strong leader allowed him to project an image of competence. His ability to deliver speeches and present simple, reassuring narratives made him a highly effective politician, even as his presidency saw significant challenges, such as the economic downturn of the 1980s and the Iran-Contra affair. Donald Trump's rise to power exemplifies the power of perception and confidence over substance. Throughout his campaign and presidency, Trump projected an image of decisiveness, wealth, and success, which led many to believe that he had the business acumen necessary to run the country. Despite numerous instances where his policies were ill-informed or poorly executed, his ability to maintain the illusion of competence and his disregard for traditional political norms helped him maintain his base of support. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of the UK, is another figure whose persona of competence often overshadowed his actual leadership ability. His media-savvy nature, charismatic and bombastic personality, and strong stance on Brexit gave him an aura of competence, even as his leadership was marred by controversies, mismanagement during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the ultimate collapse of his government. The illusion of competence is one of the most insidious forces in modern politics. It allows individuals to wield power without truly possessing the skills or knowledge needed to govern effectively. While charisma, confidence, and perception may be important aspects of leadership, they should never be mistaken for true competence. To ensure that power is wielded responsibly, it is crucial that citizens and institutions alike focus on substance over style, substance over confidence, and merit over image. In the modern world, the dynamics of political power and leadership are shaped by an intricate web of global interconnectedness, advanced technology, and mass communication. Yet, despite the complexity of the modern political environment, the age-old patterns of foolishness and the exploitation of the illusion of competence persist. Leaders who may appear to have wisdom or experience often reveal themselves to be lacking in true competence, undermining the very systems they claim to govern. The folly in power today isn't just about incompetence in leadership. It's about the consequences of poor decisions, the rise of populism, and the erosion of democratic norms. In the contemporary political landscape, populism has made a significant comeback. Populist leaders often operate under the guise of being anti-establishment figures who can speak directly to the concerns of the common people. Their appeal is largely built on their ability to project an image of confidence and competence, even when their qualifications or knowledge of governance are questionable at best. These leaders are often adept at manipulating the media, leveraging social media platforms, and using powerful rhetoric to sway public opinion. However, the nature of their competence is often illusory. While they may have a strong ability to connect with voters emotionally, they frequently lack the nuanced understanding required to make effective policy decisions. This makes them highly dangerous, as their bravado and populist appeals mask their actual ineffectiveness in dealing with complex issues. The rise of Donald Trump exemplifies this modern-day illusion. He was able to present himself as an outsider, a successful businessman, and a tough leader who could break the gridlock in Washington. His ability to project confidence, to speak in simple, definitive terms, and to convince people of his strength allowed him to accumulate power, even as his actual policy knowledge was often shallow and reactionary. His administration faced numerous issues stemming from this lack of competence, including his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and the divisive rhetoric that intensified social and political divisions. While Trump's image of competence helped him maintain support, it also led to a number of misguided decisions, particularly in foreign policy and public health, showing that projecting strength and decisiveness can be dangerously misleading when it's divorced from actual expertise. Another troubling modern-day manifestation of political foolishness is the rise of authoritarianism in various parts of the world. Many authoritarian leaders, while outwardly projecting strength, often demonstrate a lack of true understanding of governance, economics, or human rights. The illusory competence they maintain is often rooted in propaganda, the suppression of dissent, and the manipulation of state-controlled media. These leaders often create an atmosphere of fear in which citizens are too afraid to question or challenge their actions. They present themselves as the only ones capable of solving a nation's problems, even when their policies are irrational, unjust, or unsustainable. While they may appear competent on the surface, the reality is that their policies are often short-sighted, leading to economic instability, social unrest, and the erosion of democratic freedoms. Vladimir Putin's leadership of Russia is a case study in the dangers of political foolishness in the guise of competence. Putin has projected himself as a strongman leader whose firm grip on power has allowed Russia to maintain a certain degree of global influence. However, his governance has often been characterized by disregard for the rule of law, the suppression of political opposition, and the curtailing of free press. While he portrays himself as a competent defender of Russian interests, many of his policies have led to international isolation, economic sanctions, and widespread corruption within the state apparatus. Putin's approach to leadership is a clear example of how an authoritarian leader can create the illusion of competence through the manipulation of public perception, fear, and control over key institutions. However, the long-term effects of his reign have been disastrous for both the Russian people and for global stability. In the digital age, the tools of political manipulation and the perpetuation of the illusion of competence have become more sophisticated. The rise of social media and digital platforms has allowed political leaders to bypass traditional media outlets and communicate directly with the masses. This has opened new avenues for creating a public image of competence, while also making it easier to manipulate public opinion through misinformation, disinformation, and targeted propaganda. Social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram allow political figures to control their narrative in real time, often amplifying their most confident and charismatic qualities. This can be especially dangerous in an era where truth is often overshadowed by the rapid spread of sensationalized information. Leaders can appear competent simply by dominating the media landscape, even if their actions are rooted in ignorance or incompetence. The former president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, exemplifies how social media and the amplification of a confident populist image can obscure true competence. Bolsonaro utilized social media to bolster his image as a no-nonsense leader willing to challenge the establishment. His public persona was one of decisiveness and strength, even as his handling of the COVID-19 crisis in Brazil was widely regarded as a failure. His refusal to embrace public health measures, downplaying the severity of the virus, and promoting unproven treatments led to unnecessary deaths and suffering. Yet his ability to project strength and maintain a loyal base of support helped him stay in power, despite his lack of competence in handling one of the greatest public health crises in recent history. In many modern democracies, the illusion of competence has undermined democratic institutions and the very concept of accountability. When leaders who lack true competence manage to maintain a strong public image, they can bypass the mechanisms that are supposed to keep them in check, such as independent media, political opposition, and judicial oversight. The combination of populism, media manipulation, and authoritarian tactics leads to a situation where even the most incompetent leaders can remain in power for extended periods. This undermines the ability of democratic systems to function effectively and holds back the progress of governance. Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary, is a prime example of a leader who has exploited the illusion of competence to dismantle democratic institutions. Orbán's rhetoric, painting himself as a defender of Hungarian values and sovereignty, has resonated with many voters. Yet his actions, such as curtailing press freedom, undermining the judiciary, and suppressing political opposition, have damaged Hungary's democratic framework. While Orbán's policies may appear competent to his supporters, they have led to the erosion of democratic checks and balances, resulting in a more authoritarian state. The widespread appeal of the illusion of competence is rooted in deep psychological factors. Humans naturally gravitate toward certainty and decisiveness. Leaders who appear confident, even if their decisions are flawed, offer a sense of reassurance in times of uncertainty. This need for strong, confident leadership often overrides the desire for actual expertise or critical thinking. People tend to mistake confidence for competence, as confident leaders often give the impression of control. In times of economic hardship, social unrest, or political division, the image of a leader who is strong and resolute can be more appealing than the quiet, thoughtful competence of a leader who doesn't provide easy answers. This psychological tendency often leads to the election of leaders who promise to fix problems quickly, only to worsen them in the long run. In today's world, the illusion of competence in power remains a powerful force, with profound consequences. Political leaders can project strength, confidence, and decisiveness even if they lack the actual abilities to govern effectively. This dynamic erodes trust in institutions, undermines democratic principles, and fosters a political climate where ideology and populist appeal triumph over true competence. As citizens, it is crucial to recognize that true competence in leadership is not about confidence or charisma. It's about knowledge, integrity, and the ability to make informed, thoughtful decisions. Only by confronting the illusion of competence and demanding more from our leaders can we begin to rebuild political systems that value substance over style and accountability over spectacle. The modern political landscape is rife with illusions, where power is often divorced from competence and leadership is more about appearances than substance. As we've seen throughout history and in contemporary times, the illusion of competence has allowed unqualified individuals to rise to power, undermining the very systems that are meant to safeguard democracy, truth, and progress. This trend is dangerous not only because it leads to ineffective governance, but also because it erodes the trust of the people and destabilizes societies. However, the path forward need not be defined by this cycle of folly. Reclaiming power and wisdom requires a conscious effort to prioritize truth, competence, and accountability over charisma and populist appeal. It begins with demanding more from our leaders, ensuring that those who occupy positions of power are not only skilled and knowledgeable, but also grounded in ethical responsibility and a commitment to the public good. Citizens must become more discerning in how they evaluate their leaders. Rather than being swayed by the spectacle of confidence, we must look deeper into policies, actions, and track records, seeking out leaders who embody genuine competence. A return to wisdom means questioning easy answers, embracing nuance, and rejecting the simplistic narratives of strength that often mask incompetence. The responsibility to reclaim wisdom and true power lies not just with the leaders, but with the people themselves. A politically aware and engaged citizenry is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, one where power is used wisely and not for selfish or destructive ends. It's time to break free from the illusion, to demand more from those who claim to lead, and to reinstate the value of competence and wisdom in governance. By doing so, we can build a future where power is not an illusion, but a force for positive, informed, and ethical change.